Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 318, and we're going to talk about defending the federal worker. Yeah, no. Anyway, sorry. Fridays are a little bit rough for me. It's a really long day. I have to do what's called aftercare. That is, I have to hang out after school and babysit kids until their parents come and pick them up. And so today it went all the way to 6 o'clock. So it was a kind of long day, and I'm getting old, and these things are not as easy for me to do anymore. But anyway, let's get to it, shall we? So, in other words, I didn't have time to check up on what's going on in the world today, listen to the news, my usual round of podcasts, and so to have something juicy to talk about. But there are a lot of things going on. For example, layoffs and firings all over the government. Even the CIA announced that they were going to lay off a bunch of people. And I've heard that in order to circumvent a lot of lawsuits that are being filed against the Trump administration, they're going after the unprotected probationary workers first. And these are workers who have been working for the government for 2 years or less. They're not covered under various protections. They're probationary. Also, we know that the government is offering to buy out a lot of contracts. And so, if I was working for the government, I would think it was foolish not to take that offer. And I think I saw a figure today that the number of government workers who took Trump up on that offer was 100,000 workers now have decided to take the early retirement or to have their contract bought out. I'm also beginning to see posts from acquaintances and former colleagues, former coworkers, where they know that people are getting fired or laid off. And depending on who's talking about it, it's either perceived as a wow, my relatives finally get their comeuppance because they were like taking advantage of, really cushy government jobs being paid really well and working from home as well. And now they're laid off because they're not needed any longer. Well, the writing was on the wall for those situations, but I see other acquaintances where if they get fired or laid off, it's perceived as an injustice, which is kind of odd to me because and the one the one person I know who knows people who lost their jobs because of this layoff binge that's going on, knows that the country is broke and these jobs can no longer be paid. And for the other person, it seems like the country being bankrupt has really no significance, no bearing on the situation. Like, well, yeah, we're broke, and so they can't be paid, and so of course they're going to lose their job. No, there's just no sense of that anywhere. And before we get any further, you might say, well, you're just making this post because you're bitter because you lost your job. Am I bitter? A lot of students have often, when I would talk, be so anti-government, they would look at me and say, well, you work for a state university. And so I would say, well, this is not my main gig. Obviously, working at the church is the main one, but it's also the one that doesn't pay much at all. And so if you look at the university situation, there is no university that is truly private. And because of the way that education happens now, basically the government has taken over education, so you cannot help but work for the government in that way. However, the difference is that I taught to bring it to an end, right? Like I tried to teach in such a way so that people would realize that these jobs are not necessary. But someone's got to be out there to somehow teach a lot of these students who, at the time, podcasting wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, towards the end there, it was picking up a lot, but a lot of college students didn't listen to podcasts. They were busy trying to do their schoolwork. But years ago, that's what I would say, before the era of podcasting, That's what I would say. I would say that I'm here to try to bring to an end, to bring to a close, make irrelevant a lot of these things. And as long as they're paying me to do it, then heck yeah, I'm going to get paid to do it. But the whole time I knew that my job was always in jeopardy, given the cultural changes that were going on throughout society. Even though I am Asian, right? Even though I'm so-called minority, I am not female. Also, I'm a Jesus freak. I mean, I would a total out of the closet Jesus freak. I wore it on my sleeve. I told everyone who I was. And I was a free market capitalist to boot. And so I knew that I was always under threat. I did an episode about the ratio between registered Democrats to registered Republicans. You know, anarcho-capitalists are not even on that spectrum. And so I was a very rare kind of individual in the College of Liberal Arts in a public university. And so I knew that I was always under threat. And so I taught that way. I taught as if every semester was the last semester that I was going to teach, right? And this time around, this time when they decided not to renew my contract, they made it really easy for me to file a grievance so that maybe I'll be able to get a little cheddar on my way out from the university system. Anyway, let's get back to the federal worker. Now that you know that I'm only moderately bitter, and my arbitration hearing is this coming Tuesday, so hopefully that'll go well. So, the federal worker, someone who works for the federal government, whether in an agency or bureaucracy, someone who's elected, or even a company that is hired by the government, right? So, a subcontractor for the government. We could say, broadly speaking, a federal worker. Now, the general impression is that government workers, right, public workers, are paid more than the private sector, right? I've always heard that, and I just assumed that it was true. I just looked it up, and the Congressional Budget Office released in April of 2024. The title of the article was Comparing the Compensation of Federal and Private Sector Employees in 2022. It's a kind of longish article, but broken down by education, right? So no college, some college, or college, master's, PhD, professional degree. You can see that in the lower end, right, of lower education end, public makes a lot more than private. But then as you go up to the higher end, to the PhD level, the private sector makes a lot more than the public sector. Okay, but the article itself from the Congressional Budget Office said that, well, there's a lot of nuances here, right? And so just looking at it this way, it's kind of hard to do a comparison. Okay. Now, anecdotally, feds do better. Okay. If your check comes from the government, you're doing a lot better. One example would be school teachers. Public school teachers, generally, at least in my area, make double at least, especially if they've been teaching for a while, make double what college professors make, right? So my baby cousin, I call her that, but she's a grown woman now, but she was a lot like 20 years younger than me or something like that. I don't know. And she taught elementary school for, I don't know, 20 years or something like that. She was making double what I was making at the university as a full-time professor, teaching professor, not tenured. And so I always assumed that the public sector taught paid a lot better. Now, there are a lot of perks. So anecdotally, we can probably find examples of where working for the government pays a lot better than working for the private sector, right? So private schools definitely, not I'm saying that I'm comparing to a professor job, but now I'm teaching at a middle school, and even though with all of my degrees, yeah, I'm making maybe a third of what my cousin was making, right? So it's a lot, the scale is completely different. Um, so let's see, there are a lot of perks. So the CBO, Congressional Budget Office says, well, it's pretty close, right? Well, Fed jobs also have lots of perks. Milton Friedman, in his Free to Choose video series, Who Protects the Worker, goes over this example of how it takes 3 years to fire a federal worker. So if you are, let's say, really lazy, a bad worker, well, it will take 3 years for you to be fired. So basically, you can not do any more work for 3 years, get paid, and then, eventually get fired. Teachers, apparently, it's even harder because of the unions also on top of everything else. And so school districts, like in large eastern cities, they have to move around the bad teachers, right? Literally, they move them around. So that no one school gets all the bum teachers for too long, right? And even if they do go to another school, they kind of stick them in, I don't know, guidance counselor, right? So a job that really doesn't involve a whole lot of teaching. So and another perk is that until this year, working for the government, it is very unlikely that you would lose your job. If you do your work, right? Show up to work on time, do your job is essentially guaranteed because the government is not going to go under, right? The bureaucracy is not going to go bankrupt for lack of business, right? Even if you had no purpose, you're still going to get a paycheck, right? That is until this year. Also, it seemed that a lot of people who work for the government don't really think in terms of effects of massive government debt, right? Sovereign debt. They don't talk about the inflation, right? So until this year, where it seems like everything is coming to a head, you can sort of not have to worry about your business going bankrupt. Pension packages are pretty nice. They're so nice, in fact, that a lot of teacher pensions are bankrupting counties, right? So you have more people collecting pensions than teachers actually teaching, but they all have to be paid, right? And so how is this sustainable? I know that in California, that's a serious problem. On top of that, police and fire also have pensions, and a similar situation is happening. If you're familiar with law enforcement, what they do in the if you have a volunteer fire department, this is not applicable to you. But what happens in the last 3 years, right? Apparently, your pension is determined by the average of your salary of the last 3 years. And so, what a lot of officers do in the last 3 years is put in a lot of overtime, right? So it inflates the average so that their pensions are a lot higher. And so this is very common practice. And so a lot of counties in California, I read, it was a while ago, they started going broke because of all the pensions, right? The weight of the pensions was just too much. Then there's double dipping. I'm not sure how long you have to work for the government before you can retire, but you retire from the government and then you go back working for the government, and it's called double dipping. I Googled it and then I couldn't find anything, and then I realized, of course, why would there be something about double dipping, how to double dip, for the government? Because it probably is extremely shady. The things that I did find was that if you do retire and then go back, to the same job, then your pension is subtracted from your new salary. Right. And so it's perfectly fine to do that, but any benefit that you were receiving because of your retirement, it would be subtracted from your wages. But I do remember my cousin saying, oops, probably shouldn't have outed him, but someone saying that you could retire, collect the pension on that job, but then get another job at the government and start working on getting a second pension, right? Start paying into a second pension. So totally separate. So I don't know. There was no information on that. But apparently, it was the talk of the office. Everyone did the math. They figured out how old they would be when they would retire and then start going back to work for the government so they can start building for another second pension. I do remember Philadelphia councilwoman who retired on Friday and then went back to work on Monday, collected retirement for the first time they were in, whatever job they had, and then started building up for another retirement on Monday. I remember talking about it as being extremely ridiculous, but apparently very common practice. So pensions, as you can see, one of these perks that federal workers get, because it's generally federally, connected and unionized workers. And to me, if you are in a union, you are somehow heavily connected to the government, right? Because it's only because of your lobbyists that you're able to have all these protections for the things that you do. But economically, pensions don't work, right? It doesn't make sense in the private sector to have to pay for someone who's not working, right? And so you're not going to see that whole pension phenomena in the private sector, but you do see it all over the public sector, unions, right? Who are protected by heavily by the government, and so they're sort of de facto government workers. Also, the negative side of federal workers is that their job is not rated or judged by productivity or quality, right? It is, because there's no profit motive. There's no motive to innovate, to improve, to take into consideration changes in technology and attitudes and in knowledge. Right. So the whole DEI project, if you think about it, is extremely regressive, right? You just teach the same stuff over and over again, and the quality doesn't change. The substance never changes, but you have to spend more and more money for these DEI programs. And it's counterproductive, right? So as a result of DEI programs, you're not hiring the best, you're hiring according to quotas, which is always a drag on productivity and the speed and quality of the work that you do. So even my job when I was teaching, and if you taught pretty much every class, then the next time you have to teach it, it's not that difficult, right? It's always the first time around that you teach it, where you're trying to learn all the different things, where it's the most difficult. And after that, it's not so demanding. And because of that, for me, I would always try to somehow improve the things that I taught, right? I would always seek out better ideas, how to adapt what I was teaching to the current events. And so I had to keep up with current events. And I was able to get it down to a certain way that if I was given a 300-person class to teach, I could do it. It was not a big deal, right? Whereas other people, and so when I did teach a 300-person class, I was given two TAs, all right, teaching assistants, because there's too many students. There's no way you'd be able to teach all those. So yeah, it was not a big deal, right? And so, um, and that's kind of what I mean. And the one thing I would offer my TAs was like I would try to teach them how to do it too, right? How to be able to make it so that you're not drowning in all this work as an instructor. And, some of them were honest enough to tell me they appreciated the tips that I gave them. So there's that. So whatever you do, there's room for improvement to try to make yourself even more relevant. But there's that. Now, with all of these layoffs and people losing their jobs, I think I might have said it in one of my other episodes that you are going to see people try to find the unusual, extraordinary exception or situation to make people feel sorry for all these federal workers that are losing their job in order to perpetuate the corruption, right? In order to perpetuate the waste, so it's like, okay, so they got these jobs that probably shouldn't have existed in the first place. Now all of a sudden they're laid off. Well, it's because the country is bankrupt, and so they can't have these jobs anymore. But because people want to perpetuate their cash cow, their money stream, their revenue stream, they need to keep up the corruption, right? They need to continue and sustain all of the corruption in government so that they can continue to get paid. So when USAID was being reduced and all the workers were being let go, 60 Minutes did this fake story where they found two people who supposedly worked for USAID, and they said how they were in such hardship now because they don't get their paycheck anymore. And it turns out that they worked for a company that was subcontracted by USAID, and so they weren't working directly for USAID. And the number of years that they had worked for this subcontracting company wasn't that long. It was just less than 2 or 3 years. So anyone who takes a government job must know that these jobs are not guaranteed. I mean, especially if you're elected into office as a House of Representative or senator, yeah, you could be gone after one term. So jobs are not guaranteed, right? And once you are get in that mindset that jobs have to be guaranteed, that you're entitled to work until you retire. Well, now you have regression, right? Now you are entering a regressive society with regressive attitudes. And so your country and your economy is going to stagnate. And until you have a government that is so large that it is possible to put in slush funds everywhere. And I heard that Stacey Adams, I think a person who went after I think she was in Congress, right? Yeah, she was a politician of some kind where she got $2 billion, 2 billion. That's a B, because she faked having a nonprofit organization or something like that, which is insane, right? And so it's clearly, corruption, waste, fraud, call it whatever you will. And that's what becomes possible when your government is just so huge and there's no accountability, there's no auditing, there's no checking anywhere. And so to have Musk go through all of these agencies and just do, I don't even know how thorough these audits are, just how deep they go. But clearly everyone who benefits from all the graft, all the corruption, all the waste, they're the ones who are screaming bloody murder about how Musk is unelected, et cetera, right? Because they don't want their cash cow to die. They don't want their revenue stream to dry up. So there's that, right? The more freedom that we have, the less likely this is even possible, right? We don't want job security. I've said this before in my jobs episodes in the past. We don't need job security. What we want is job mobility. So even if we do lose a job, we can get another one really quick. Or if we're at a job and we're dissatisfied with either the coworkers or the boss or the wages, then you can find another job easily. And in order for this to be the situation in society, we need more freedom. We need more freedom for this to happen, for this to be possible, right? And the more freedom that we had, then you would never have to worry about a USAID or the government at all. So stay free. Freedom is the way to go, but you got to hold on, right? An audit of the gold might be coming, and Trump is apparently pushing for a revaluation of the gold. What does that mean? What will it do to us? How will it affect the world, much less our country? All of these are uh, questions that are difficult to answer. Vince Lancy over at Arcadia Economics has some really interesting thoughts on the matter, but everyone has thoughts on the matter. And depending on the argument they present to you, you can either be on the verge of being scared out of your mind, or just, waiting in anticipation of what might happen. Well, I hope that, you know, this helped you get some reference on what to do next, and always and be reminded of how important being free and freedom is for all of us as a society. I'll talk to you guys next time.